You're the chairman of this committee, and you've done a study, a fairly extensive study. Tell us what you found.
Well, first of all, the Business Roundtable supports regulation. We want to ensure that our products are safe, that the environment is clean, and that the markets are fair and transparent. And what this report did, it looked at what's the framework now of federal regulation, and where do you find overlap, where do you find duplication, where do you find different regulatory agencies that don't work together.
And regulation is very much on our mind right now because of Boeing 737 MAX. As you say, some regulation you have to have. In fact, maybe we haven't had enough regulation in some places.
Well, clearly you want to make sure that regulation is going to support the needs of our economy and needs of consumers, needs of different organizations. And we want to ensure that when we look at regulation, that it's meeting those purposes. And what we found in the report, obviously, is that there's multiple jurisdictions, multiple regulations, sometimes the federal level, multiple agencies, and then all the way to the state and the local level, and you can get all kinds of overlap. One example where the administration has come out with an approach is called the FAST Act about infrastructure. And the FAST Act found a way to get the different agencies to support speeding up of approval of infrastructure. Now infrastructure is coming in at almost 2 years faster, and billions of dollars have been saved.
Actually, I was talking to Vicki Hollub of Occidental about that in terms of building out pipelines, and she's like, that was instrumental in getting deals done. So that's for regulation that already exists. What about regulation that doesn't exist? We talked all morning about big tech and sort of what's coming down the pipeline. How do you address those what do you see with that?
Well, that's actually one of the areas that's very important that the Business Roundtable is looking at. Let's think about privacy. You have the GDPR in Europe, which came out and forced all types of companies to come up with an approach towards privacy. And in the United States, we're following. California is coming out with its own law. Do we want to have 50 different state laws, or would it be better if we coordinated that right up front? So not only does it have implications in the U.S. and competitiveness for the tech sector, but also how are we going to act globally?
You have some very specific recommendations about the sort of approach that could be taken at the federal level, at least, which involves increased communication, designate a lead regulator, yes, things like that. Can that be done by the administration itself, or does there need to be congressional action in some of these areas? Because let's be honest, Congress likes it sometimes to have overlapping regulation because different committees have different jurisdictions.
In some cases, you could act with the administration, but generally speaking, it's going to be better if it's both a combination of the administration and Congress working together. And there are areas like financial services, transportation, as well as food safety that are three of the areas we're looking at right now in this report.
So when you talk about kind of when it comes to tech, for example, like getting out ahead of everything so it's not sort of bifurcated, is there the stomach within the tech community on a CEO level to be like, yes, we would like that regulation?
Well, they are working together, and we see Tim Cook and other CEOs from the tech sector taking a lead on this, trying to get ahead of it, working with the Business Roundtable and other organizations. So I do think that the tech sector is going to realize that it's to their benefit to get ahead of this.
How much of the overlap and redundancy is just because we don't have a regular process by which we go back and review regulation that's 10, 30, 40 years old to see whether it still applies anymore?
Well, that's part of it, and that also is something that comes up when you think about all of the change going on with business models. And I'll give you an example of a brand new one. It's meatless meat. Who's going to regulate meatless meat? Is it the USDA? Is it the FDA? And so this is the sort of thing to get the FDA and the USDA out ahead of it. In fact, they are in this case.
So, but how do you do that? And I harken back to, say, plant-based milk, for example. Like, just now, it's becoming like, how do you quantify if that's milk or not? And that's all coming.
And how do you label it?
And how do you label it? Because milk producers are getting really hammered by the plant-based milk. How do you get ahead of something like that before it actually hits?
Well, this is exactly why the Business Roundtable has this report, why we have a committee called the Smart Regulation Committee. This is not easy. This is the sort of thing that usually comes last after people have already thought about different business models and how they're going to work. And that's why the Business Roundtable wants to address this. That's why we're highlighting it today.
This is the sort of thing that Donald Trump has said he'd like to do. Do you have a receptive ear in the administration to your report? The
last couple of administrations have been receptive, and there's a lot of receptivity in the Trump administration. And one of the examples is that FAST Act that we saw, where for infrastructure that they've moved on that. The USDA, the FDA are working together, and there's many other cases where a lead regulator has been put in place. But this is something that Business Roundtable really wants to advocate.